we'll assume that the size of a data entry is 1/10 the size of a record. What do I mean by that? If a record is 400 bytes, we'll assume that the size of the data entry is 40 bytes. That's not always true. You really want to do it, you have to take a look at what the actual size of the data entry is. But just to make the analysis really simple, we'll make a simple assumption that it's 1/10 the size. So the search key would be 40 bytes. You know, the thing for age and salary it is 1/10 the size. So again, if the record size was 400 bytes, the size of the data entry would be 1/10 that, which would be 40 bytes. In practice, whatever the fraction is, it might not be exactly 1/10. In practice, when you're doing analysis of this, you actually figure out what the actual fraction is when you do the analysis, but we're gonna be making the assumption. What about the total size of all the data entries? Suppose that there isn't any free space. We'll relax that in a second. But suppose that there isn't any free space kept. The total size of the records is going to be 10 times the size of the data entries, because each data entry is 1/10 the size of a record. So if every single data entry is 1/10 the size of the record, then all the data entries, lead end to end, is going to be 1/10 the size of all the records, right? 1/10 of all gives us 1/10. Since 1/10 of each, the data entry is 1/10 of each record, so the total size of all the data entries jammed together, no free space, is 1/10 the space of all the data records with no free space, okay? That's the way things work over there. With a hash index, we will assume that there's no overflow, that all the things fit inside the hash buckets. We've got, you know, a lot of hash values, and we'll assume that there's no overflow. And now we're going to talk about free space a little bit here for both B trees and hash. We will assume, and again, it may not be the case, you just got to make some assumption, or then we'd have to do it based on, you know, a lot of different parameters, but we will assume that 4/5 of the buckets is filled up on average, that each bucket is 80% full. So again, a hash bucket, you're not going to have a hash function, which is the identity function. You hash based on whatever, taking, you know, the exclusive OR bits, or treat it as a number and take it modulo 1003 or something or other. Whatever the hash function is, we'll assume that and we'll assume there's only one hash bucket needed, and that it's 4/5 full, 80% full. So what does that mean? There's an expansion. If it's 4/5 full, the amount of space that you have is 5/4 of what you would have if everything was jammed together. 4/5 full, meaning you're using 5/4 the space you would use if there were no free space. Let me say this again, because I'm going to need it again soon. If the buckets are 4/5 full, then I'm paying an extra overhead where I'm having 5/4 of the space I would have if everything was jammed together with no extra room involved. 4/5 full, 125% of 1.25, 5/4 times the space if it were all jammed together. So basically, what's the total size of the hash table if those assumptions are true? Well, if you take the total size of all the data entries and you multiply that by 5/4, that's the amount of space that I have in the hash table. Everything is 80% full, so the blow 80% 4/5. Take the inverse of the 4/5, I get 5/4. I have 5/4 of the space I would have if I jammed everything together. So it's 1.25 times the total size of the data entries. What was the total size of the data entries again? Oh yeah, it's 1/10 times the size of the records. Assumption first thing on the next line. 1.25 times the total size of the entries, the size of the data entries, is 1/10 the size of the records. So 1.25 times the total size of all the data entries is the same as 1/10 times 1.25 times the total size of the records. Basic algebra. A little bit confusing. So it's gonna be 0.125 times the total size of the records if there were no free space in either. But because there is a free space, that's where the 125 comes in. Okay. Unclustering B tree index. That's what's going on now. The leaf pages hold data entries. This is approach 2 or 3. And we will make again an assumption that things are 2/3 full inside the leaf pages. Again, it's going to be between half full and 1 full. On average, it'll be about 2/3 full. 2/3, 67% full. How much am I blowing up my space compared to if there were no free space? If it's 2/3 full, I'm blowing up my space by 3/2. 3/2 of what life would be like if there were no free space. 1.5. So the amount of space that I have in my leaves of my B tree for this unclustered or non-clustered index is 1.5 times what I would have if there were no free space. Okay? So the total size of the leaf pages is 1.5 times the total size of the data entries if there were no free space. Because it's only 2/3 full. Inverse of 2/3 is 3/2, that's where the 1.5 comes from. 1.5, 3/2. What's 1.5 times the total space of the data entries if there were no free space? Well, each data entry is 1/10 the size of a record. Multiplied by 1/10, it's 0.15. 1.5 times 1/10. 0.15 times the total size of the records. So, everybody okay on that? We're making all sorts of unwarranted assumptions. If I weren't making those assumptions, I'd have to have a lot more algebra with variables all the way through inside this. And you could do the same thing with the algebra of what you're assuming about how full things are and all the rest of that stuff. People okay with this? Everything else that follows is going to come from it. So we'll come back.
Quick question. Where it says if no free space in either, that's saying that there's no free space in the data entries and there's no free space in the records.
Correct. It's 1.5 times the total size of all the data entries if there were no free space in the data entries, which is going to equal 0.15 times what the total size of the records would be if there were no free space in that.
And so all our free space here is built into the like 80% occupancy.
It's built into the inverse fractions that we're playing. Exactly right. Okay, so other assumptions, as we've already said, in the B trees, we're going to assume the leaf pages are chained together, so we don't have to go back up the tree to be able to go through when we're doing a scan or a range query. Okay, and we will assume, and you can see why this is true, but it's not an assumption, it's just the way the access method works. If I'm using an index, let's say, to be able to do a range query, I need to be able to, or even an equality query, but let's take the equality one simple. To find all the things that equal a particular age and salary, I'll go through the index to find the matching tuple or tuples. And then I'll go to the data. So there are always going to be two costs that are involved in what I'm doing. Find the data using the index, if there is an index. Find the RDs. And then use the RDs to get the data. So again, when I'm using an index, two costs. Use the index to find the matching RIDs. Use the RIDs to get the data. One last time saying this. When I'm using an index, hash index or B tree index, there will always be two costs that get added together. Find the RIDs that match the search criteria. And once you have the RIDs, get the data using the RID. Everybody knows how to get the data using an RID? Better for project 1 and project 2. Okay, so that's what's going on there. And for range queries, B trees are great. What about hash indexes? Again, I will remind you, if I'm searching for everybody whose age is between 20 and 25, I'd have to look up 20 and then 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. If I'm looking for all the people whose salary is greater than 1,000, look up 1,001 penny, let's only go down to pennies, 1,002 pennies, 1,000, no, sir, the range and cash, not really a great match. And it's not totally ridiculous in the 20 to 25 example, but it is totally ridiculous in the salary greater than 1,000 example. This is the matrix. And we're going to go over every cell of that matrix. But we're going to do it a little faster than I normally do, because again, doing this based on the disk assumptions rather than CPU assumptions is very, very, very much out of date. We're going to fill all these things in. There, wasn't that easy? No. We're going to do this row by row by row by row. We're going to finish it today. Some of these things are easier to explain than others. In some cases, I'm going to ask you to give me the explanation of some of the cases. But we'll start off with a heap and we'll talk about what's going on. Everything's going to be multiplied by D. I will remind you before we do this. B is the number of data pages. R is the number of records that fit on a page. D is the time to read or write a disk page. The assumption that's being made here, which is ridiculous, is that no data pages, no pages are in memory, that every time you go out, you're going to have to touch a page unless you just touched it before. Not a sane assumption in practice at all today. The detailed stuff that we'd have to go through if we weren't doing that, we're not going to spend the time on. And F again is the fan out. So in fact, everything that we look at is going to get multiplied by D, which is unreasonable. There's the unfilled in matrix, here's the filled in matrix. What's going to be the time to be able to scan using a heap unit, go through all the tuples in the table? Well, we'll go through the things in the first block, in the second block, in the third block, right? We just scan through the whole file, one by one by one, block by block by block. So D is going to be the cost of going out to disk to get a page. And B is the number of pages that are in the file. The first page, get everything on that first page. Get the second page, get everything on that second page. Get the 17th page, get everything on that page. You never have to go back because you're just using file scan. You always have file scan as a way of accessing everything. So it's going to be B, which is the number of pages in the file, times D, because everything, we're assuming nothing is sitting in memory. Having to deal with assumptions when that's true just gets way, way too complicated. Let's keep on going with heap. We're going to do this on row by row by row. What if I look for equality? And again, these are averages. If I'm looking for equality, on average, if it's there, I'll find it halfway through. If it's not there, I'll have to go to the end. But if it is there, then I'll find it on average halfway through. So instead of having B times D, I'll find it halfway through. So it's on average, assuming it's there, 1/2 of B times D. That was easy. For a range query, why can't I stop halfway through when I find values? Because for a range query, there could be lots of matches. Looking for everybody with salary greater than 1,000, there could be a lot of people with salary greater than 1,000. I have to go through the whole file to find all my matches. So again, it's going to be B times D. It's pretty straightforward. Insert. Again, ugly. Let me explain why the 2D is there. Most of you would probably assume, and you'd be rational, that it would just be D. Why is it 2 times D? I'm going to the end of the file. I read in the last page of the file, or I create a new last page, and I write my record. So 1 D to bring it in, and another D to write that last page. Same thing on delete. I find where what I have to do is I have to search to find the place where the record is. So I have to do the exact thing that I had for doing the search for the equality. So it's a search for equality. When it says search there, it means search for equality. And then if I found the thing, if it's not there, I have to go through everybody. As soon as I find it, I have to rewrite the page with that record deleted from it. And, you know, I'm not gonna be coalescing all the things together, I'll leave a gap in the case of the heap file question.
Why are we not searching on insert?
Because I'm inserting at the end.
But you're not searching to see if the value already exists? Or we're assuming that we don't have to do that?
Where, the assumption is that we don't have to do that, we're just putting the record in, there's no assumption about uniqueness or primary key. You're right,
Okay.
if we were making an assumption about uniqueness, you'd have to do the search to see whether or not the thing
Okay.
is already there. But no assumption is made about
So
uniqueness.
we're ignoring that constraint.
The assumption is that there's not a constraint. Age and
Okay.
salary, there could be multiple people. That's why we said the example is age and salary. Without saying age and salary are unique, I suppose there could be a database system that imposes the constraint, but it seems kind of ugly and awkward. And, nah, let's not make that assumption. Okay, if the file is sorted, and I need to do a scan, I need to touch everything, it's B times D. It being sorted doesn't help me, even though it happens to be sorted by age and salary, I still have to scan and touch everything, so it's B times D. Okay, what about equality? That looks a little more interesting. I can do binary search. Assuming I can find the page in the middle of the file. If they're consecutive pages, page numbers, then I can do that. Or I use a simple page directory that allows me, again, to do binary search in the page directory and then on pages. So I find, where the value is based on doing binary search inside the file. That's gonna be logged to the base 2, and it's logged to the base 2 because it's called binary search. It's logged to the base 2. The F doesn't help me there. I need 2 to be able to find where the value is. Range gets a little more interesting. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I'm confused about the D in front of,
Everything is multiplied by D because I have to touch the data, I have to touch the data, the disk pages, I have to read them in.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Basically, D is the cost to be able to read, to either read or write a disk page.
Okay,
And everything in this chart is multiplied by D, even when it doesn't look like it is. For example, the search thing is multiplied by D, so when I write equality search, plus D, there's a D multiplied through. Frankly, it'd be a lot easier to just leave out the D everywhere.
okay, so
It's
it's,
not-
okay,
Okay.
thank you.
The next one, the range query. It's a sorted file. Find the low end of the range, which if I'm looking for less than 1,000, I just go to the far left. I go to the first record. But if I'm looking for things which are, ages between 20 and 25 or something like that, I find age 20. I find the low end of the range. And then since it's sorted, I just go through the pages of my sorted file as long as there's a match, as long as I'm inside range. So I do a search to find the low end of the range, and then I just keep going until I get outside the range. So that's what's written there. And there could be a lot of matching records. What about insert? There's a funny factor there. When you see B times D, that's really 0.5 BD plus 0.5 BD. It's really BD over 2 plus BD over 2. Let me explain that. What do you have to do an insert? Find the place where it goes. That's our good friend search. Equality search. By search, it always means equality search. And now what do you need to be able to do? All the later records in the file, all the later blocks in the file, gotta be pushed out. Eviction, heavy construction happening. On the average, half of the blocks in the rest of the file. The stuff earlier in the file gets to stay where it is. It gets to stay sleepy, happy, doesn't have to get moved. All the blocks, and on average there are 1/2 of B of them, all those blocks gotta get read and written out with things shoved out. So I take everything at the end and I move it out to put the new record in. So that's a 1/2 BD to read them, because that's the number of things there are, half of the file, half of B. Everyone takes D, that's the cost of reading it this page, and I'll read it out again, that's the other 1/2 BD. So it's, when you see BD there, it's gonna be a 1/2 BD plus a 1/2 BD. Exactly the same thing on delete. On delete, what we said is, on the sorted file, we're not gonna be leaving any gaps, no free space, no deleted bits. That's a choice just for this analysis. So it's again gonna be search plus BD. Now that we've had the background, we come to the much more interesting ones. These are places where I'll be asking you some questions. 1.5 times BD to do a scan. Anybody wanna tell me why? So again, let me read what's there and then I'll go back to the slide that has the answer. For a clustered index, or the alternative one, the data is stored inside there. Why is the cost of doing a scan of the entire clustered file going to be 1.5 times BD? Go for it. Hand name answer as usual.
Usually, since the pages are 2/3 full, you can also go through 1.5 times as many.
Yeah. The data has been blown up to 1.5 times what it would be if everything was jammed together. 1.5 times. And so it's gonna be 1.5 times the number of pages. Remember, the data is actually stored inside the index. So if I jammed all the records together, the total size would be the total size of all the records. But the number of blocks has to be increased by 1.5. It's 1.5 times the number of blocks. So read that as 1.5B times D. The number of blocks, if everything was jammed together, would be B. It's not jammed together. I have some extra free space. 2/3 full means the expansion factor is 1.5. So it's 1.5 times B, and then multiplied by D, because I gotta keep reading in every single one of those pages. Question?
So this assumption also holds for clustering.
This
Not
assumption,
just on clustering.
the assumption is that we're also gonna be going up by, 2/3 page occupancy, even with the cluster, yes.
Okay.
Okay, next. Anybody wanna tell me, this is an easy one, where the D times log to the base F of 1.5B comes from? And why is it F, not 2?
It's a beach.
Hand name answer.
Go on.
Because it's a B tree isn't enough of an answer. You wanna answer it?
No.
Go for it.
Brent, because the fan out is the number of children or child nodes that on average that you'll have
Mhm.
instead of 2 in a binary tree.
It's a tree where the fan out is F. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to go ahead and search for a particular value. So the depth of the tree is log to the base F of the stuff that I have in the bottom of the tree. How many pages do I have in the bottom of the tree? Not B. B would be true if I had everything jammed together. The expansion factor is 1.5 because things are 2/3 full. So it's gonna be 1.5 B pages, same as it was over there, 1.5 B pages, but I'm searching through the tree. I'm not going to all the pages, I'm just searching, and again, the depth of the tree is gonna be logged to the base F of 1.5 times B. And so I'm going through the tree. If the top levels of the tree are in memory, then I won't have to get those in. Again, the stupid assumption is I have to read everything in. In practice, it's gonna be a lot less than that, because again, the top levels of the tree, and maybe the whole tree are gonna be in memory. And so that's why that one is. Okay, I'll do the easy one, which is the next one. When I'm doing a range query, what do? I find the value, which is the low end of the range, and then I get all the other matches. So I do the same thing that I had to do for equality, and then I get the matching records until I get out of the range. So that's what's going on there. Hint, on the search plus D. It's got 2 parts to it, the search and the D. Remember, it's always look through the tree and then get the records. Yeah, what's the explanation?
So you search for the correct element,
To the correct place.
by
to
the
put
correct
the element.
page,
Yeah.
and then you write the new page.
Right, and by the way, search reads the value in, the correct search already reads the page in. And then the D is to do the writing. So the reading of the page is already in the search. The search means search for equality. Delete, it's exactly the same thing. You find the record in there and then you delete it, assuming it's there. Of course, if it's not there, then there's nothing to do. But it's search plus D, assuming it's there. Okay, and now, unclustered tree index. How much time I got? 6 minutes. Well, we're gonna at least get through the unclustered tree index. This is always an interesting slide to spend time on. What the heck is going on here? Hint, there are two parts to this. One on one part of the plus sign, the other on the other part of the plus sign, both multiplied by BD. There's a time that I spend in the index, and there's a time that I spend getting records. Unclustered index are very unfriendly for doing scans. But the formula is worth understanding, even though in some sense the entry in the matrix is nonsense. So let me explain this one, because I do have a bit of time. I gotta look through the index to find every single record. But remember, the leaf pages of the index are linked together. So what I need to be able to do is I need to be able to go through my unclustered index to be able to find every single record. So again, the ugliness is basically, I'm going to find the value that corresponds to the first value that I have inside the index. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to scan through all these different blocks. So I'm going to go through all these different entries, and now there's going to be the cost of going through all these pages that are the leaf pages of my index. So I will go through all the leaf pages of my index. That's going to be one of the things on one side of the plus sign. It's actually on the right side of the plus sign. And then there's the cost to get the pages. Now, this is why unclustered indexes are terrible for doing scanning. I'm going to have to touch this page. I'm going to have to touch that page. I'm going to have to touch this page again, which may or may not still be in memory, depending on what's going on. I'm going to be touching each page lots and lots and lots of times. The, again, really, really stupid assumption, but without that stupid assumption, the analysis of this gets very complex, is that every time I need to have a page, it got swapped out. It's not true in practice. But every time I need a page, the stupid assumption in this analysis is, I'm going to have to read it again because it might have gotten swapped out. Again, it's not true in practice. The analysis with a more realistic assumption gets very, very complicated. So the two things on the two sides of the plus sign are go through every single one of these pages, go through every single one of these pages, and then find the records where the assumption is every time I need a disk block, it's not inside memory. Again, not realistic, reasonable assumption. So here's the matrix, and we're down to this row here. The 0.15 times BD is the time that it's going to take to be able to go through all the leaf pages of the index. And the BDR is going to be the time to get all the records. Again, let's just go back and go through where that comes from. That's why this chart is so important. The total size of the leaf pages in an unclustered index is 0.15 times the total size of all the records. How many blocks are there? In the data, B. So the number of blocks that I'm going to have in the leaf page of the index is going to be 0.15 times B. That's why we spent all this time on this. The total number of blocks in the records, if they were jammed together, would be B. Because of this combination of the 1.5 and the 1/10, the total size of the leaf pages of the unclustered index is going to be 0.15 times B. That's where that comes from. One more. about this ridiculous value, BD times R, again, everything's multiplied by B, by D rather. There are R records in each block. There are B blocks. So how many total records are there? B blocks, there are records in each block. Be the first one on your block to say that it's B times R. Right? B blocks, R records per block, B times R records. Every one of these stupid records in this very simple-minded analysis just left from Miami when I needed to bring it back in. Flew south for the winter. But if the blocks are not in memory, every time I need a block, I'm gonna have to read it in. So the assumption is, bing, 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 bing. The stupid assumption is that every time I'm gonna have to read the block in. So it's gonna be BR records have to get read in at a cost of D. Bing, 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 bing. System R, this was called dark thread. You don't know where things are. There is a more detailed formula if you assume that things might be in the buffer space. Again, I'm not gonna go through it. But that's the general idea of what's going on. Walk through all the pages of the index, 0.15 BD. Get the pages in, and every time you need it, you're gonna have to get it. Why do I say this is a really stupid entry in the diagram? You know what's really gonna end up happening in practice? If I have to consider using an unclustered index that's on a heap file, I'm gonna use row 1, column 1 instead. I've got a heap file. I could just do it in BD by ignoring the index completely. I'm not gonna do this. This is BD times R plus a 0.15 factor for good measure. R is gonna be more than 1 in general. I am wasting my time messing around with a useless index just to show that I can. Well, it's actually more to show you what the formula is and why the darn index is so silly and useless. I might as well go with, just look at the heap and forget messing around with the index, because in this case, it's not really helping me. I will also eventually tell you about why unclustered indexes can be a little bit better than what we're talking about here. But not today, because I'm not practically out of time, I am out of time. This chart on its own is a one lecture chart. We will continue with unclustered tree index. I'll remind you about that last entry. We'll talk about that next time. We will pull off this chart and this lecture next time, because I gotta go to another class.